Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. You are very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News this morning. You wake up to some very disturbing news. A gunman has killed 21 people at a primary school in Texas. The victims include 19 children aged between 7 and 10 and 2 adults. At least one of them was a teacher. They were preparing to start their summer break this week. The killer has been identified as an 18-year-old who was armed with a handgun and an AR-17 semi-automatic assault rifle. Police shot him dead at the scene. A visibly emotional President Biden asked, "Where is America's backbone?" When, he said, "In God's name, are we going to stand up to the gun lobby?" We'll be live in Texas for you. It's Wednesday, the 25th of May. America's 27th school shooting this year. 19 children and 2 adults are shot dead by a teenage gunman. One of the victims was a teacher named as Eva Mireles and said she loved hiking and was the fun of the party.
When, in God's name, are we going to stand up to the gun lobby?
Also ahead, Sue Gray's report into how lockdown rules were broken in Downing Street is expected to be published today.
What this report by Sue Gray tells us about boozy parties in Downing Street when the rest of us were told to stay at home could define the Prime Minister's future.
Commuters face a summer of chaos and cancellations as railway workers vote overwhelmingly for a national strike.
And we have an eyewitness report from inside a Ukrainian city now almost surrounded by Russian troops. Also coming up on the programme for you this morning, wherever you're watching us around the world, from an orphanage to a peerage, we'll speak to Simon Woolley about his journey from a Leicester council estate to the House of Lords and his plan to inspire black kids. And we'll also be joined by a young ballerina who's sashaying her way to the Royal Ballet School. Hello, everybody. Very good morning to you. A gunman has shot dead at least 19 children at a primary school in Texas. At a news conference, the state governor said he shot and killed horrifically and incomprehensibly. It's believed that the teenage killer's first victim was his own grandmother before he drove to the school armed with a handgun and an assault rifle. A teacher was also among the dead. The attack happened at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, around 270 miles west of Houston. The school has around 475 pupils. Our US correspondent Greg Milam reports from Texas.
The Robb Elementary School has now taken its place alongside Sandy Hook, Columbine, Parkland. Yet another school shooting to haunt America, this time primary school-aged children killed in their classroom. The faces and the names are different, but this has become an awful fact of life in America. The first of the victims to be identified was teacher Eva Mireles, herself a mother, wife of a policeman, a career educator who was very loved, according to her family. The White House flag was lowered to mourn the lives taken. A president and his wife, a teacher herself, of course, wrestling with the horror and the helplessness.
An elementary school. Beautiful, innocent, 2nd, 3rd, 4th graders. And how many scores of little children who witness what happened see their friends die as if they're on a battlefield, for God's sake. When, in God's name, are we going to stand up to the gun lobby?
This is the gunman who was responsible. Salvador Ramos bought the rifles on his 18th birthday. He crashed his car before entering the school around midday, moving between the classrooms until he was shot dead by a police officer.
My heart was broken today. We're a small community, and we will need your prayers to get us through this.
Uvalde in Texas is now the scene of the deadliest primary school shooting since Sandy Hook almost 10 years ago. Many believed that massacre of 6- and 7-year-olds would change everything. It shames America that nothing has changed. But once again, the calls for gun control come.
By doing something, we at least stop sending this quiet message of endorsement to these killers whose brains are breaking, who see the highest levels of government doing nothing.
The grief is unimaginable for the families of Uvalde, but this is the 27th school shooting this year in the United States. A country wondering what it will take for anything to ever change.
And the 144th mass shooting in America so far this year. More mass shootings in the US so far this year than there have been days in the year. Greg is joining us from Texas, but the gun lobby is so strong in America, isn't it, Greg? Good morning.
It is so strong, and I mentioned Sandy Hook there, and of course that with the loss of those 20 young lives nearly 10 years ago, I think that still is a lesson for many people. And Joe Biden was the vice president and sat in the Senate chamber when the attempts then at pretty modest gun control measures dealing with background checks, even that failed after those 20 young children, six staff members at the school, even after they died, America couldn't, and their politicians couldn't come together to come up with something that deals with this. And here we are again. And I don't think there's great faith in America now that even this will result in anything different. And you heard Joe Biden there imploring America and its politicians to come together to stand up to the gun lobby. He talked about the fact when there was an assault weapons ban here that the number of mass shootings did go down. Talked about the fact that other countries have the social problems of domestic violence or mental health issues or people who are lost in society. They have the same problems, but they don't have these mass shootings because simply they don't have the access to guns. Things that seem very obvious to everybody, but still it seems won't prompt politicians to take the actions. And all the time, of course, we think of the personal tragedies for those families who lost so much last night, and the investigation continues into that, and the mourning as well for this small town, and the fact that 2 days from now, these children would have been on their summer break, which is a lot to think about for those families and everyone, I'm sure, watching this news now.
Indeed so, and we know that at least, as you said, at least one teacher has lost their life as a result of this gunman's actions. It's spring break, I believe, at the end of this week, so a lot of these kids were planning their holidays.
They would have been, yeah. It's a small town. Spring break is different in different parts of the country, but yeah, Thursday would have been the end of the term. Monday is Memorial Day, which is a big holiday in America, and then they would have been off for the summer, which adds to the tragedy, doesn't it, of how this has happened and the timing of this happening, and the questions about the person responsible, Salvador Ramos. The police say is a local person. He lives in this town. He'd gone to the high school in the same area. He bought those guns, 2 high-powered assault rifles, on his 18th birthday. The first thing he did on his 18th birthday, the police said, was buy these assault weapons. They don't know what his motive was. At the moment, of course, he was shot dead by a border patrol agent, actually, who didn't wait for backup, who went into that school to end this shooting when he saw what was going on. So they won't know what from him directly what the motivation was. We know on social media he had hinted at what he might do in some messages. He posted pictures of those weapons, so that might offer them some clues as to what lay behind this awful assault, and one which again has left America asking all of these questions about how these things happen here and how they can be prevented.
Okay, for now, Greg, thank you. Well, America, as you're just hearing there from Greg, has some of the world's most liberal gun laws. The 18-year-old gunman responsible for the Texas shooting could legally buy a semi-automatic assault rifle. Couldn't buy alcohol until you're 21. The attack is the latest in a series of shootings. This is the 27th school shooting, as Greg said, in the United States so far this year. Last year, the US experienced 61 active shooter incidents, the highest tally in over 20 years. President Biden has said that since the Sandy Hook school massacre in 2012, there have been over 900 incidents of gunfire reported on school grounds. Joining us now is Professor Brian Levin. He's a former US police officer and now criminal justice expert at California State University. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme this morning, Professor. It's incomprehensible for a country like the UK to understand the gun laws in the US.
And it's incomprehensible to many of us here in the United States, because the way things have worked is that gun restrictions vary from state to state. So a state like California, for instance, we had an active shooter who got his gun across state lines in Nevada. And indeed, you have referenced the ridiculous problem of violence we have that is affecting our young people. In the United States, young people 25 and under, the number one cause of death right now is firearms. That includes suicides as well. And listen to this, 10 times the number of people 30 and under have died from gun deaths than have died from COVID during the pandemic. But the fact of the matter is, there is no constitutional restriction as of now to limiting access to firearms in certain situations, but the political lobby of the NRA and its related fellow travelers has been an unstoppable speed bump to getting anything done at a federal level. So we're stuck with making laws on a state by state level. So whether it's New York City or Chicago or elsewhere, guns come in from other states, or in Texas, where last year the governor made it easy for 18-year-olds to get weapons when heretofore it was age 21 where you had attained that level to get firearms, that age rather. So yes, those of us who study this are as astounded as our friends in Britain are.
I believe that Joe Biden has recently, even before this event, called for fresh gun restrictions. We heard this, of course, after Sandy Hook. We hear it very often after mass shootings in the United States, and still nothing is done. What would it take?
What it would take is having people at the federal level in the U.S. Senate get booted out at election time. But that hasn't quite happened yet, because we are so critically divided, basically 50-50 in our United States Senate. And we can't get any bills through when there is that kind of division, when all the Republicans vote against gun restrictions and the Democrats generally vote for them. It's really a stalemate, unfortunately, and that leaves the unfortunate situation to fall back onto the states, where it's very porous because our borders here in the United States do not require people to get checked when they go from one state to another.
And is it? Am I right in saying that this kid can buy a gun on his 18th birthday, but he couldn't buy alcohol?
That's exactly correct in the state of Texas. Yes, and it's not just Texas. It's many other states throughout the South and rural parts of the United States.
That's, I mean, almost unbelievable that is the case. So many mass shootings in the US. I'm just trying to look up the figures. Depends which website you look at as to how many mass shootings there have been already in 2022 in the US. But it looks as though there is more than one mass shooting every single day in the United States. Would that be accurate?
Yes, it would be. Now, not every mass shooting results in mass homicides. But the bottom line is the fatalities in the United States are just so much higher than our friends in Britain have, and in Canada, or really most of the industrialized West. It's insane, but unfortunately, the political stalemate that we have here prevents us from having a ban on assault rifles like the kind we had during the 1990s, which unfortunately is no longer law here in America.
One wonders what your forefathers who came up with the Second Amendment, amongst others, would think of the interpretation of that right to bear arms.
I think they would think it's crazy, and here's why. Just bear with me for one moment. The Second Amendment says, 27 words, a well-regulated militia, comma, being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. They had envisioned a decentralized military force at the state level to protect against tyranny from a large standing army like the Redcoats back then. But unfortunately, it wasn't an effective military strategy. And eventually, these militias, which were open to males 17 to 45, became the National Guard. But this notion that there's an unbridled right to gun ownership by anyone at any time just doesn't exist. Even the most conservative member of the Supreme Court, Antonin Scalia, who authored the opinion in the Heller case in 2008, which gave individuals some type of right to private handgun ownership in the home if they were otherwise legally okay as far as mental competency and criminal records, he even said that you're not entitled to a gun anytime, anywhere. And he was the conservative justice who wrote that. Even with a fundamental right that is protected by the Constitution, the Supreme Court has held that it can be regulated. And that's the case here. It can be. We just don't have the political will to do so.
Professor, thanks for staying up late to speak to us here in the UK this morning. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Looking at other websites suggesting there have been 212 mass shootings in the US so far this year. There have been 144 days. I'm sure you can do the math. Sue Gray's report into how lockdown rules were broken at parties in Downing Street is expected to be published today. Joined now by Tony Blair's former Director of Communications. That's Alistair Campbell. Hi, Alistair. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Am I right in saying that you went up to Dunblane with Tony Blair when he was Prime Minister?
No, he was Leader of the Opposition, and we went with John Major, who was Prime Minister. And I think that was an incredibly powerful signal at the time, a Conservative Prime Minister going with the Leader of the Opposition to show absolute support for the community of Dunblane. And I think that moment, in a way, is what justified politically and helped politically the legislation that we then brought in when we were in government. Since when there's not been, I think I'm right in saying there's not been a single incident in our schools remotely comparable with the sort of shootings you've been talking about in America. And if there's one thing I urge you guys at Sky to show today, Sky, you may already have shown it, but the basketball coach, Steve Kerr, I've just been watching his comments when he was doing the pre-match press conference, and he made the point, they go through these things, everybody is tweeting their thoughts and prayers, and everybody's saying all the sort of cliches that people roll out at these times, but the kind of exasperation that comes through, and I think was coming through in your previous speaker as well, it's just, I'll never forget that visit to Dunblane and seeing the sort of the coat pegs and the coats hanging off the pegs and all the sort of paraphernalia of a primary school, but it led to change. And what seems to me about this, what the guy there called this stalemate in America, and the powerful hold of these right-wing, very heavily financed lobby groups it's just horrific, and it's killing people.
Yeah, the NRA, the National Rifle Association. Let's talk about some of the challenges that the Prime Minister is going to be facing today. Finally, we believe that we're going to be seeing the report from the senior civil servant, Sue Gray. But we basically know what's in it. So isn't it time to move on now?
Well, if we, quotes, move on, as these Tory MPs keep saying, what it means is that we now live in a country where the rule of law is not an inviolable principle in Parliament, where it is no longer a principle of our Constitution that a Prime Minister and any minister should stand at the dispatch box and tell the truth, and if they inadvertently don't tell the truth, correct the record. And that says to me that these Tory MPs who are now propping up this guy, they are undermining our democracy to an extent that I don't think we've ever seen. So I think if we move on, I think we can say goodbye to the kind of democratic system that we have. And for what? For one guy's vanity and narcissism. And you're right that we know the basic story, because Boris Johnson has set the basic story. He said right at the start, there were no parties. There was no breach of the rules. He was assured. Now we know, not only was he aware of breaches of the rules, he was breaking them himself on a systematic basis, underlining the fact that as far as he's concerned, rules and laws are for little people, and big people, people with power, people with wealth, they can do what the hell they want. And you'll probably have a minister on later on. Have these people got any self-respect whatsoever? Do they not go home to wives and husbands and kids who say to them, I'm sorry, you cannot defend the indefensible any longer? When you get, I think it's George Eustace doing the round, how can these people defend? Just play back to him, Kay, some of the previous defences that he's made when they had a different line and a different story. So it was wait for the police. It turned out he broke the law. And then it was wait for Sue Gray. And they say, well, whatever Sue Gray says, as you've just said, we know the story anyway. The guy is a liar and a charlatan. He's doing nothing for this country in terms of taking the country forward. And the entire Conservative Party is
Let me jump in, Alistair, if I may.
In this myth. Sorry?
OK. Let me jump in, if I may. A couple of things, really. I mean, the Prime Minister was fined once, not several times. So the police have looked at this in detail and they've decided that it was one fine that he should pay. You talk about inadvertent misleading of Parliament. He says he didn't know at the time. And then as soon as he did know, he came back to the dispatch box and corrected himself.
He didn't correct himself. He came back and said sorry for the actions of other people. That's what he did, and that's what he always does. And the point about the single fine, I'm afraid, as Sadiq Khan and others said yesterday, the Metropolitan Police have got a lot of questions to answer about the extent to which they investigated this properly. And also, Kay, the one fine is enough to sink this guy because he insisted, quotes, there were no parties. We know he was at them. You don't just need the pictures. You need the testimony of other people. And I'll tell you the other thing that happens. I worked in Downing Street. This would never, ever have happened under Tony Blair, under Theresa May, under, I think, any previous Prime Minister. This is Johnson's character and Johnson's culture. So I just don't believe that when the police say, you know, one fine, I think that was them just trying to get out of this very difficult situation for them.
OK, before I let you go, what do you think is going to happen? Because it would appear that nobody else wants the job. Nobody's certainly challenging the Prime Minister. So it doesn't matter how much mud is slung around in the chamber of the House of Commons and on radio programmes and TV programmes like ours. It's still going to be in post next week after that.
Well, I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But if that is the case, then, you know, I don't want to swear at this time in the morning, but this country is in a very, very bad way. If this guy survives, are we just to accept as a country? Is this what our democracy has come to? A Prime Minister can break the law. A Prime Minister can lie repeatedly at the House of Commons dispatch box, send out his cabinet of lapdogs to go out and repeat it for him. Have we got to a stage now where there are literally no principles attached to the basis of our democracy, including the rule of law? Then, if that is the case, we are finished. And Tom Dukenhart was absolutely right yesterday. What this says is we do not have a serious functioning government. And if he was doing other great things, the economy was booming, inflation wasn't soaring, growth was high, none of which is happening. If he was actually leading in the world, if he was actually delivering on the promises that he made at the last election, he's doing none of that because the truth is the guy is amoral, he's a liar, he's a charlatan, he's a crook. And if those Tory MPs have not got the slightest bit of self-respect and integrity and honesty to look in their hearts and look in their souls and say, are we really going to damage our country in this way, then they deserve to be kicked out as well.
OK, thanks for joining us this morning, Alistair. Thanks a lot. As Alistair Campbell said, it is George Eustace speaking to us momentarily here on the programme. Of course, we'll bring that to you around about 7:30. Before that, though, let's bring in Tamara Shashwi. She's standing by in Downing Street for us this morning. Hi, Tamara. It's going to be uncomfortable reading for the Prime Minister. How much notice will he get before we all see it?
Morning, Kay. It certainly will be. We've had a lot of the details already. We've heard about late-night gatherings. We've heard about suitcases of wine. But today we will get the full account, the full unvarnished account of what actually went on at all these gatherings. We've been waiting for it for 6 months, and we're told it will finally come today. It is not with Number 10 yet. I'm expecting it will be sent to them mid-morning. They will have a bit of time to digest it, and then the plan is for the Prime Minister to do PMQs at midday, to then give a statement talking about that report, apologising to Parliament. He will then do a press conference later this afternoon, and then he will address Tory MPs. So I think he's trying to get all the apologising to all the different key groups out of the way today, in the hope that he can move on from this afterwards. Number 10 are very much treating this as a very serious official account of what happened. I think they feel that some of the stories that have come out have been, they feel, slightly unfair on them. They have been at pains to point out that the people in Downing Street were allowed to be at work during the lockdown, and that the Prime Minister and some others have only been fined once over some of these gatherings. But I think certainly the Prime Minister will need to apologise for at least what we know Sue Gray criticised in her initial report as failures of judgment and leadership from the top. And last night we heard some of the first eyewitness anonymous accounts of some junior staff saying that the Prime Minister was not only not telling people to go home when these drinks were going on, but actively grabbing a glass himself. So the Prime Minister is likely to have to clarify some of that. I expect he'll outline some of the changes of personnel that have occurred in Number 10 since all this came to light a few months ago. I think the big question now, Kay, once Sue Gray's report is out, we may well see photos, we may well see more details, is first of all, can the Prime Minister weather this, especially by bringing forward a package on the cost of living, which could come as soon as tomorrow? And secondly, what about all those Tory MPs who we haven't heard much from, were waiting for the report, reserving judgment? What will be their reaction?
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. As I said, hearing from George Eustace momentarily. Before that, though, we've got some breaking news as far as Chelsea FC is concerned. Mark is here with us. Nadine Dorries tweeting.
Yeah, that's right, Kay. The government has just confirmed that it has issued a licence permitting the sale of Chelsea Football Club. Just to recap quickly, Roman Abramovich, the owner for the last 20 years, sanctioned by the British government at the beginning of March, triggering a 3-month sale process which attracted billionaires from around the world trying to get their hands on one of England's most successful football clubs. The auction of Chelsea was won a couple of weeks ago by a consortium headed by an American billionaire called Todd Burley, who owns the LA Dodgers baseball team, and an investment firm called Clear Lake Capital. Now, over recent days, Kate, there had been doubts about whether the government would issue the licence which paved the way for the sale of Chelsea. There were concerns that Roman Abramovich was in some ways trying to influence the destination and the way that the £2.5 billion of the sale proceeds would be spent. Now, that impasse has been resolved. Nadine Dorries, the Culture Secretary, has just tweeted saying, last night the government issued a licence that permits the sale of Chelsea FC. Given the sanctions we placed on those linked to Putin and the bloody invasion of Ukraine, the long-term future of the club can only be secured under a new owner. We are satisfied the proceeds of the sale will not benefit Roman Abramovich or other sanctioned individuals. I want to thank everyone, especially officials, who have worked tirelessly to keep the club playing and enable this sale, protecting fans and the wider football community. And just very quickly, Kay, the timing of this is very important because in order to play in next season's Premier League and Champions League competitions, Chelsea needed to be able to register for those tournaments by the end of the month or by very early in June. The fact that this sale will now go through with the UK government issuing a licence allows that to happen. Just one more point. The Portuguese government, because Roman Abramovich is a Portuguese citizen, and the EU still need to approve this, but that is now regarded as a formality. Chelsea fans can look forward to a new era of ownership and put the recent uncertainty surrounding the club behind them.
OK, Mark, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thanks for the update. Still to come on the programme for you this morning, I'm going to be speaking to former Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police, Sir Peter Fahy, on whether the police's Partygate investigation went far enough. We'll speak to the Secretary of State for the Environment, that's George Eustace, ahead of the publication of Sue Gray's report into the Number 10 lockdown parties. And also to an animal welfare charity, Blue Cross, about what's behind the recent spate of dog attacks. Railway workers have voted overwhelmingly to strike, and the prospect of huge disruption on the railways could be just weeks away. Joining us now, Fraser Maud. He's in Leeds. Hi, Fraser. Good morning. Could be all sorts of problems for commuters if this goes ahead.
Good morning, Kay. There could indeed, yeah. It's estimated that if signallers go on strike when the strikes are called, it could mean that services are reduced to something like a fifth of their normal weekly rates. It could mean £30 million a day being lost by the rail network. It could mean that services are limited to maybe 2 hours of 7 in the morning till 7 in the evening and only on main lines. So there's real potential for serious disruption. Of course, people are only just coming back to the railways after the lockdowns and after being forced to work from home. Many people still choosing to work from home, and of course that's meant that the number of rail fares are dropping. So it's an industry that's losing money. The government says it's been propping it up since the start of the pandemic. It can't continue to prop it up, and it's looking as though they're going to have to cut their funding by something like £2 billion. That means potentially 2,500 jobs at risk, according to the RMT. They say that today's endorsement of railway workers is a vindication of their approach and sends a clear message that members want a decent pay rise, job security and no compulsory redundancies. The Department for Transport says that strikes should always be a last resort, not the first. So it's hugely disappointing and premature, they say, that the union is calling for industrial action before even entering discussions. The situation now is that the union bosses will meet to work out a timetable for potential strike action, and that could be as soon as the middle of June.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Actually, I'm just going to wander over and we'll chat to the Environment Secretary, who is joining us now. Hi, thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. It's great to see you. Let's talk about Texas, first of all, though. You've seen the terrible news overnight. And I was just sharing with our viewers, there have been more mass shootings in the US so far this year than there have been days in the year. Your thoughts?
Well, look, these are absolutely harrowing, and we've seen multiple incidents of this sort over the years. You know, I've seen interviews today with some of the parents of, parents who've lost children to such, terrible events. You know, and obviously it'll reopen again a debate in the US about their gun laws, which obviously are very, very different to what we have here in the UK. They have a very different culture and a different approach there. But I think for sure it's going to reopen that debate for them.
And thank goodness for that. I'm sure lots of parents will be saying this morning. Let's talk about Partygate, should we? Eyewitness reports that we heard last night. Is it worse than you thought?
Well, look, I think we've known about a lot of these events for some time now. That Sue Gray alluded to them in her first interim report. Obviously, the police have investigated all of these events as well. They gave the Prime Minister a fixed penalty notice in respect of one of them. And obviously, we'll see what the final Sue Gray report says. It's expected, sometime this week. Some speculation that it might be today. And we'll have to see what the final report is. But look, the Prime Minister said all along, he's given an account of how he saw these different events. He's paid the fixed penalty notice, but he absolutely recognises that there were failings. He's apologised for that, apologised for his role in that. And, of course, he's trying to make changes because there was a blurring of the boundary, if you like, between, events that were happening just at the end of a working day in a working environment, a blurring of that clearly to what became, in some cases, parties.
You said previously that some of the allegations were over the top, but we're hearing from eyewitnesses yesterday, and we'll hear more, I'm sure, today. 30 or more gathering from 4 o'clock. They were having wine time Friday. There were so many people in the room that they couldn't all get a seat, so they had to sit on each other's knees. The child's swing was broken. There was a karaoke machine. The PM going in, grabbing a glass for himself. Do you still think it's over the top?
Well, I never said that those clearly, if you've got events like that, that's not, that is not acceptable, not within the rules at all.
How would you describe those events?
Those are clearly wrong, and that's why the police have issued a large number of fixed penalty notices in respect of some of those events. The point that I was making is where you had instances, for instance, at the end of a working day, people in a working environment, member of staff leaving. They might have had a drink and given a toast to that member of staff in the office environment to leave. Well, that's slightly different to something that then turns in, obviously, to a party.
It was against the law at the time.
Well, yes. Well, I think actually, if it was in a working environment and this was simply at the end of the day to send people off, it wasn't necessarily a breach. But obviously, some of these events clearly were, Kay, and that's why they've issued a large number of fixed penalty notices.
Yeah. But the events that I specifically was talking about there on the 13th of November, the police did issue fines for people that were at that event. So it was clearly against the law. And the Prime Minister was there.
Yes, and look, the police have obviously looked at this far more closely than I'm able to. They've taken witness statements, they've looked at all of the evidence. They chose to issue a fixed penalty notice to the Prime Minister in respect of one of the events, the one where it was his birthday and people brought in a birthday cake. He's accepted that, he's paid that fixed penalty notice and apologised for it. The police will be closer to the detail of this than I am, because I wasn't there after all. And they've chosen in this case not to issue a fixed penalty notice to the Prime Minister in that case. And now, as to why they would have done that, well, they would have based that on the evidence that they saw and the statements that they took at the time.
The Mayor of London has asked the police to explain themselves. I mean, do you think he shouldn't have done that?
Well, look, I don't think we should question the operational independence of the police. They showed very clearly by the fact that they issued a fixed penalty notice to both the Prime Minister and the Chancellor that they were doing their work without fear nor favour. And they've also issued a large number of additional fixed penalty notices in respect of some of these other events. I think we should, trust and respect their operational independence in these matters.
Although you didn't trust the independence of Durham Police, and many of your colleagues pushed for them to look again at what happened with Keir Starmer. Some would say it's one rule for one and one rule for another.
Well, look, it isn't. There were people that asked questions of the police. There were police, the Metropolitan Police, initially felt that it probably wasn't worth going back to events that had happened previously. They were put under pressure. They decided, therefore, to look at that. I think people accept that when you're talking about, politicians, people in politics, people in public life, sometimes the police will judge that the public interest test is such that they should look at things in a way that perhaps they wouldn't in other circumstances. And they've done that in the case of all of those events in Downing Street, a very thorough examination of that. And, of course, Durham Police, are looking again now at that issue surrounding Keir Starmer.
But the Prime Minister was presiding over a culture of where 126 fines have been issued for breaking the law when the rest of the country was in lockdown. People were sleeping at their desks because they were so drunk they couldn't go home. The child swing was broken, karaoke machines, as I've said. We saw the Prime Minister where there were 6 bottles of booze and a bottle of gin on the table. He was presiding over all of this. Shouldn't he accept responsibility?
Well, look, I think he has, and he's demonstrated that by the statement that he gave to Parliament when Sue Gray published her initial findings. She highlighted the fact that there was a culture of drinking and a culture that enabled the blurring of the boundary between what was, an acceptable thing at the end of a working day with people working in an office together during difficult times, and what was then becoming, an event and a party. She said that there were failings. She highlighted that in her interim report. I suspect that a final report will build on that and be quite critical in some of those regards. She said there were management failings at many different levels. She's already made that clear, and she's made recommendations on how the operation at Number 10 should be changed. And the Prime Minister's already been clear that he will implement all of those. Some people so drunk that they had to sleep on a sofa at Downing Street, while some members of the public couldn't go to the funerals of their loved ones. The optics of that, surely the Prime Minister should think, I presided over that, I was responsible for what happens in Downing Street. How can he possibly stay in post? Well, look, it's not just the optics. It's understandable that people will feel anger because there were instances, yes, where people, couldn't attend funerals of close friends, that couldn't visit loved ones. And, of course, we absolutely recognise that. The Prime Minister recognises that. That's why he has apologised for the failings of Number 10 and for his own part in that. He's come to the dispatch box several times in Parliament, to apologise for that. He's paid that fixed penalty notice. He absolutely acknowledges just how angry people will feel and completely gets that and has apologised for that. But he still will stay in post, even though he misled Parliament? Well, I don't think it's right to make that assertion. Obviously, there is a Standards and Privileges Committee that is looking at that particular allegation. What if they decide? Well, ministers and politicians are not supposed to knowingly mislead Parliament, but the Prime Minister himself has also given a very clear account of his own understanding of all of those events that he attended, that he didn't regard them as parties, that he didn't regard them as breaking the rules. He's explained that was his understanding. And obviously, where the police have said that there were particular failings on his part, in respect for the birthday party where the cake was brought in, well then, he's acknowledged that and he's paid that fixed penalty notice.
But if the committee finds otherwise, that he did, in fact, mislead Parliament, then he must go, surely?
Well, look, let's let the committee do its work. I don't want to get into hypotheticals here. There are lots of parliamentary processes of this sort. He said, fine, let the committee investigate this, look at it. But obviously, they're going to want to take evidence from him. They're going to want to talk to him, and we should let that process run its course and not get ahead of ourselves.
We could talk about that all day, but of course there's another couple of things that I want to ask you about, not least the rail strike, Rail and Maritime Union voting to go on a national strike. You could, I think I'm right in saying, consider legislation to ensure minimum staffing levels in the event of a strike. That was something that was in your manifesto. Is that something that you would implement?
Well, look, obviously Grant Shapps is working quite closely at the moment with, the rail unions to try to make sure that they don't go this step. The truth is the pay settlements haven't yet, even been discussed. There are some important reforms and changes that are going to need to be made on things like ticket offices, some of which aren't really used anymore, and it's not viable to keep them all open. There are digital technologies that we can use to make processes work better, to help passengers.
Yeah.
There are technological things that will improve rail safety.
But my question is, would the government consider changing the law to ensure minimum staffing levels, as was suggested in your manifesto?
Well, of course, we don't rule any of these things out, but at the moment, what we want to try to do is to work with the unions and to get some constructive engagement here with them. There are some real challenges facing the railways during the pandemic. Huge amounts of public subsidy had to go to keep the rail network running, with passenger numbers down. Passenger numbers, remain down, and that means we are going to have to change the way certain things work and change certain practices.
But you're not ruling it out?
We're not ruling anything out, but what I'm trying to say, Kay, is in the first instance in these things, obviously we try to engage constructively, with the rail unions and the workforce in each of these cases.
OK, final question before I let you go. Ukraine last night pleading with the Royal Navy to go to Odessa to try to stop that blockade of the port. We were speaking to your colleague yesterday who said that, Grant Shapps, of course, he said that if that blockade continues, more people are likely to die around the world from starvation than will die in the war in Ukraine. Are we looking again at the Royal Navy going?
Well, look, there aren't any plans to send the Royal Navy to the Black Sea. However, what we are looking at is other corridors to try to get some of those grain stores out of Ukraine. I understand there's sort of perhaps 30 to 40 million tonnes of grain there, and that's a significant proportion of current world stocks, which is probably around 230 million tonnes. It's very important in these situations when you have this kind of stress on the system that you keep world markets open so that you can move grain from the countries that have it in store to those that need it.
So overland, is that what you're saying?
Yes, but for other... Yeah, exactly. So countries that have put in place export bans, for instance, that's very, damaging to confidence around the world. Luckily, all of the big producer nations recognise this and they're all keeping their markets open. So ourselves, the European Union, the United States, we're keeping markets open so that grain can flow around the world. But I know that there is some thought being given by the G7 as to how we can potentially get safe corridors to be able to move some of those grain stores out by land.
OK, for now. Thanks very much indeed, Minister. Much appreciated. Thank you. It's going to be a busy day for you. Now, taking a look at this morning's newspapers, the Mirror leads with a new photo from an event in Downing Street during lockdown and asks, why did the PM deny it? It's the same story in the Star this morning. It has the headline, Party Animals, after revelations of a social drinking culture inside Number 10 during lockdown. The Eye leads with news that energy bills are set to rise by around another £800 a year in a few months as the energy price cap is raised once more. According to the Telegraph, a windfall tax could be announced within days as Boris Johnson tries to put Partygate behind him. Well, the PM is bracing himself for the publication of Sue Gray's full report into those parties during lockdown. It follows the conclusion of the Met Police's probe. Joining us now is Sir Peter Fahey is with us now, actually, in fact. Hello to you, Sir Peter. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. Former Chief Constable, of course, of Greater Manchester Police. They met under a lot of pressure again this morning, not least from the Mayor of London wanting answers as to why the Prime Minister only received one fine. Is it reasonable for them to have to answer those sort of questions to explain themselves to the Mayor?
Yeah, it's absolutely. And, you know, I think the Mayor should have got involved at a far earlier stage and put in place a process to actually provide confidence to the public. You know, he didn't need to get involved in individual decisions about who got fined, but he could have put a process in place to actually help the Metropolitan Police in terms of providing some cover. But the crucial issue here, really, and I think the Minister almost said it, is that the legislation is very confused. It was simplistic, it was rushed. That's perhaps inevitable in this sort of situation. But really, people are looking for this very poorly drafted criminal law to carry the weight of political accountability on the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition. And that is, you know, very unfair and can't happen. There will be a lot of anger today, I think, within policing about this report. Cressida Dick lost her job. She was sacked, in effect, because supposedly she failed to, you know, achieve a satisfactory culture in one particular police station where there were inappropriate WhatsApp messages. And the fact that there has been this wholesale culture you know, in number 10 Downing Street, which has angered the public, you know, clearly, you know, has produced a lot of cynicism. But the fact is, as I say, the police have had to try and do their job with this very poorly drafted legislation. And the Minister said this sort of blurred distinction between what is an essential work purpose and when that then becomes a social event.
Yeah, you say simplistic, but I suppose the simplicity of it could be to the benefit of the police as well, because you weren't allowed to gather inside apart from work events, and, you know, 6 bottles of wine and a bottle of gin on the table seems to, I would have thought, most right-minded people that it was more than just a work event.
And that's why a lot of people got fines. But, you know, in terms of criminal law, simplicity doesn't really help because it is about the letter of the law. And undoubtedly, some of the people involved in this exploited the confusion and the inconsistencies and the ambiguities of that law when they answered those questionnaires in terms of that blurring as to when, as I say, between it being a essential work purpose and what was then a social gathering. The other thing you're seeing here, and it's reflected in some of the newspaper headlines, is also this confusion about what was against the law and what were the rules. And I think, you know, the anger of the public is also about the fact that there was so much messaging every single day about social distancing, about not going out, about masks. And clearly the police themselves had to reinforce those messages when they were dealing with the public. But the fact that, you know, they were rules, they were guidance, and the police have to operate on the basis of what was the letter of the law in terms of this particular investigation.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Thank you. OK, let's take you to Ukraine now, where the war has been going on for 90 days. President Zelensky has said that he will only talk with Russia's Vladimir Putin directly, not via intermediaries. Alistair is standing by in Odessa for us this morning. Hello to you, Alistair. Just hearing there from the Minister that although Ukraine's asking for the Navy, the Royal Navy, to help with that blockade, that's not going to be forthcoming anytime soon.
Yeah, OK, well, let's start with that development. You'll see behind me, actually, some of the grain silos in the port here in Odessa, full to the brim, waiting to go. But there's been no merchant vessel activity here, really, for the last 3 months. And so that is at the very source of what is now a quite rapidly deteriorating global food crisis. And they are looking at ways and means where they might be able to get the grain out. One of those would be road, but any road movement of grain is going to be a lot slower than if they they were to use shipping as would normally be the case. But the problem is you've got out to sea, at least 20 miles, so beyond the offing, really, the Russian naval blockade of Odessa, which is stopping any merchant vessels from coming in here. So you would need a military escort of some description, but then you have the problem that if the British or others get involved from NATO countries, then the Russians might see that as NATO intervention. So fraught with problems there, but a situation that is growing worse around the world, particularly in places like the Middle East and North Africa. Secondly, in terms of what you were mentioning in the introduction to me about what President Zelensky has said this morning and the offer for talks if the Russians withdrew back to the positions they were in pre-February the 24th. Just to clarify, those positions were in sort of the Donetsk and Luhansk region in eastern Ukraine. I don't think that's going to happen. I just don't think that's a flyer with President Putin, not least because the Russians have the momentum in the Donbass region at the moment. They are making progress, which is not something you could have said of the Russian military in much of the last 3 months, but they are making progress. They are pretty close to completely capturing the entirety of the eastern Donbass region. And I think at the very least, that is what Putin will want to do before he entertains any potential peace talks, if that's indeed what he wants to do. What I do think President Zelensky is right in saying is that any potential, and I think it's not likely, but any potential that peace talks are going to yield some sort of break in hostilities, I think that will have to be done leader to leader. But so far, that has not come close.
OK, Ali, for now, thank you. Well, Russia is slowly making some progress in its campaign in the east of Ukraine. The main focus of Russian forces is the Donbass region to the east of the country. The area is made up of the provinces of Luhansk and Donetsk, both seeing heavy fighting along their front lines. Severodonetsk is one of the last big towns under Ukrainian control, but Russian forces are encircling it from the north and also the south. Our special correspondent Alex Crawford got into the town over the last remaining bridge. Its people are living under constant Russian bombardment.
He doesn't even flinch.
We're used to it, he says. It's been 3 months. Valery and his wife Nila won't leave. They've notched up 135 years between them, and they're now enduring bombs which are landing every few minutes. It is unrelenting and goes on and on as he weaves his way back through his community and takes us to his home, where he and his neighbours have been sheltering and where he's been ferrying food and water to, where there seems to be still a fair amount of people living. His neighbours tell us how hard it is to get even water. Yelena's saying she has to carry 2 or 3 bottles by hand. Everyone begins to panic at what sounds like cluster bombs landing far too close by. We head for the doorway to shelter. Open the basement, Valery shouts. Come, come, he says. I'm used to it. Everyone piles inside, waiting for yet more incoming bombs. Every day is like this, Yelena tells us. It was quiet for just 10 minutes. Every day it's back and forth like this, flying over our heads. Seconds later, Valery is punched by a neighbour. He's angry at Valery for bringing foreign journalists here. Many blame us for prompting the bombings.
Was he pushed?
This war has set pensioner against pensioner and forced neighbours to turn on each other. Please tell the world what's happening in Donbass, she says.
What's she saying? What's she saying?
And show, please, how it is.
Yeah, we will.
I'm trying not to cry, she says. I'm trying to keep myself calm, but you need to tell them what the situation is.
Well, this is going on all the time. Constant barrage. It's unbelievable that there are so many people who are still living and having to put up with this. They're right in the middle of it.
Well, you can watch Alex's full report on the Sky News app and also on our website. I want to update you on the news that you're waking up to this morning, that 19 children and at least one teacher have been killed after a gunman opened fire at a primary school in Texas. The attack happened at the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, around 80 miles west of San Antonio. We have the name of a teacher who has sadly lost her life. We'll be bringing you more on that in the next hour. And also, Eva Morel is her name, and also telling you more about the 18-year-old gunman, Salvador Ramos, who has been killed but shot dead by the police. He bought 2 guns on his 18th birthday. This is what the president said a short while ago.
Beautiful, innocent, 2nd, 3rd, 4th graders. And how many scores of little children who witnessed what happened see their friends die as if they're on a battlefield, for God's sake. When in God's name are we going to stand up to the gun lobby? When in God's name we do what we all know in our gut needs to be done?
Just to put that into context, the children that have died are aged between 7 and 10. An 18-year-old came into their school and shot them dead while they were at their desks. We'll see you at the top of the hour.